And then I'm going to be broke after I get the pocketbook and can't even afford that. You know, you think you may look cute in it, walking with it down the street, and then it starts raining and you got to put it on the part of your clothes because you don't want it. But you pay for everything with time. You pay for everything with time. And so the stuff that we have gotten has almost made us slaves in this country through brilliant marketing. And they make us slave because they make us buy things that we really can't afford, so we finance it, which is artificial prosperity. It's artificial. It's artificial. So, work is so important in our society that we normally define people by what they do. By what they do. Work is so important in our society that we define people by what they do, not who they are, but what they do. What they do. So, practically everything at this particular time in history was done by slaves, even doctoring and teaching done by slaves. Work was actually considered below the dignity of a Roman free man. If he was free, he wasn't supposed to work. Work was something that was done by slaves. It was done by slaves, or you could say by employees. And so, though there were just a few felicitous relationship between master and slave, that where they were really happy. There were some people that were happy because there were some wonderful masters that were good to their slaves, and they were happy people. They enjoyed being there. But most of them, the vast majority of master-slave relationships were very, very miserable existences, because the master possessed the power of life and death over the slave. If he wanted to kill his slave, that was his business. That was no trial. I mean, if a slave ran away, he was branded on his forehead with an F for fugitive, an F on his forehead, and he was sometimes put to death with no trial. And so Christianity's preaching of the gospel with this explicit doctrine of equality, it raised tension in a highly prejudicial world. I want you to understand that very clearly. The gospel helped to really bring change. Think about Paul's teaching when Paul was talking to the church at Galatia, Galatians chapter 3 and verse 28, where he says, "There is neither Jew nor Greek, slave nor free, male nor female, for you are all one in Christ." He dealt with the slave and the free thing. He said, no. In Christ, bump that. Now, this is a paradigm shift for them. This is a total paradigm shift. See, but now you cannot preach freedom from the old inequities in a society, as Paul did, without being asked, how in practice does this work out in a society where the inequities have continued unchanged? How do you do that when the inequities have continued in an unchanged fashion? You can be sure here that Paul's teaching in Colossians chapter 3, verse 22, down through chapter 4 and verse 1, that it was attended very, very eagerly by both slaves and masters that were in Colossae. But remember now that this was written to church leaders. It was not written to government leaders or the civic leaders of the day. Not at all. So, here's what I want you to understand. It seemed necessary for Paul, because of all of this tension that was caused, for him to actually give a word concerning the slave-master relationship. In the same way that he felt compelled to give a word concerning Christian wives and husbands in their newfound freedom in Christ, because it could have driven a wedge between them. And so it was even much more urgent for them to say something concerning slaves and masters. And so notice Paul's words: "Bondservants or slaves, obey in all things your masters according to the flesh, not with eye service as men pleasers, but in sincerity of heart, fearing God. And whatever you do, do it heartily as to the Lord and not to men." Now, when I first heard these words without explanation, I'm asking myself, now, Paul, whose side are you on? Because it sounds like he's endorsing slavery here to me. It's like, it's like, listen, y'all stay in your place and obey what these folk tell you to do. But here's what I want you to hear. Here's what I want you to hear. Of course, he was encouraging submission. He was not encouraging when he said, obey your masters in everything. He was not encouraging them to submission to anything that was immoral or hurtful commands, just as in the case with the children obeying their parents. You don't obey your parents if they're asking you to do something that is immoral or illicit. But yet the word everything is so encompassing, because he said obey them in everything. Obey them in everything. Now, here's why he said everything, and I want you to understand the context of this. Because slaves were often asked to do things that were very unpleasant. Just like as an employee, sometimes you might be asked to do something that you really don't want to do. You might be asked to work at a time that you don't want to work, or to do some task that you honestly just don't want to do. So there are some tough commands there. This is a tough command, but especially when it is linked with the next phrase, which is not with eye service. Say eye service. See, the word eye service here, in the Greek here, it really means work that is only done when the boss is looking. Work that is only done when the boss is looking. So he's telling them, I want you to obey in everything and not just when the boss is looking. I want you, he's speaking now to their personal integrity. This is about personal integrity, slave or free. You got to have integrity whether you're a slave, and you got to have integrity whether you're a free man. So this is whether you're a slave or free. He says, listen, if you're going to be on the job, do what you're paid to do, whether the boss is looking. Don't be an eye service. Eye service. See, that means that the slave does not only do that which is necessary just to attract the favor of the boss or to escape punishment. He does what's right because it is right. There's a novel idea. That's what people with integrity do. You don't just do it because the boss is there. Of course, we have this saying that when the cat is away, the mice will play. But when you're going to be a Christian, Paul is saying for the slave or the employee to obey not only when the boss's eye is on you to win their favor, but with sincerity of heart and with reverence for the Lord. Just think about it. I noticed when I was in gym class and the teacher would have us to get out and do push-ups. Can you imagine the bishop doing push-ups? But when the coach would look away, our form was not as good. I would see people just sort of half doing them. Some big old robust guys start doing the girl kind of push-ups. Because the coach had turned his head and his eye was not on him. Paul is saying here, do what's expected of you, what you've been paid to do, contracted to do, whether the boss is looking at you or not with eye service, just so that you can be seen and, playing that role. Don't just do that with the eye service. So he's dealing here with personal integrity and the work ethic of the Christian. Now, the advice here that Paul gives is really ultimately revolutionary, because in time it brought the downfall of slavery as an institution. And here's what I want you to understand. It must be understood that systemic change happens over time and not overnight. Systemic change. Say systemic change. Systemic change is not the same as systematic change. Systemic change means that there is a system that is in place. It takes a long, long time to change a system. Slavery was an institution. It was a system. It was a system. You have to realize, even when slavery was dismantled in America, it was a system. And it wasn't dismantled just because of the hearts of some good people. It was dismantled because the Industrial Revolution made it where slavery was no longer economically feasible. Because machines could do it faster, without time off, and you didn't have to feed them. They were more economically. That's why slavery was dismantled in America, not because somebody all of a sudden had a conviction in their heart to say, oh, It's wrong to treat people like slaves and make them work for free. No. It was the advent of the Industrial Revolution that made slavery obsolete in this country, because it could be done cheaper and faster by machinery. That's why slavery was dismantled in America. But so it has to be understood that slavery here in this time, it was a systemic evil. And systemic change happens over time and not overnight. Progress happens by process. Please understand that. Progress happens by process. You have to have a process. You can abort a good thing because you tried to bring change in your life too rapidly. You can't change everything in your life overnight. Do you know what will happen if you try to lose weight? I mean, you're talking about people, I'm talking about morbid obesity. I'm not talking about 25 pounds overweight. I'm talking about 225 pounds overweight. You can't lose 225 pounds in a month. I mean, you can try. You need to have some radical surgery. You're going to have some stuff cut out. You know, but you just, when you need major change, you have to do it over time and not overnight. When you do it too rapidly, you'll shock the system. You'll shock the system. Systemic change happens over time, not overnight. Progress happens by process. What is your process? If you're trying to change something, understand I need a process in my life. Don't wing it. Have a process. Ask yourself, what is my process? What is my plan? You can't change unless you've got a plan. There has to be a process that we do this, we do that, and then this happens. Change is phased in.
Thank you for watching Power for Living with Bishop Dale C. Bronner. Join us again next time for Power for Living, where revelation is power. Power for living.